And welcome back to Icons of the Dragon Ball community, where I interview very important people who have contributed positively to the Dragon Ball world. And joining me in this edition, somebody who's been contributing a hell of a lot lately, especially in the past couple of years, but really more so in the past 5 or 6 years. But now his name is everywhere. He's been on the channel before, he's talked to me before many times, and this time we're going to talk about him and his journeys through life all over the world. Please welcome Herms, otherwise known as Jake. How are you, bro?
Hello. Or also Todd Blankenship.
Yes, people who actually think your name is Todd, bro, which kills me.
Well, it's my fault for using a pseudonym for no particular reason, but we can get to that later.
Yeah, we could talk about the origin of Todd Blankenship later on. So I want to talk about the man Herms himself. You know, you actually were on the channel a few months ago. We did a Q&A where I had some of the people ask you questions, just general questions. But this time it's icons, and it'll be immortalized forever as we get to know you. And I've already spoken in the past to the other 3 horsemen of the Kanzenshuu. I've spoken to Mike, Heath, and Julian, and you are indeed the 4th horseman. So it's a pleasure to talk to you as always, bro, and it's always a pleasure. So I want to go back, man. I want to start at the beginning, okay? I want to talk about you when you were little Jake, when you were a kid, all right? Before Dragon Ball, what were you into?
Let's see. Well, I guess probably the earliest fandom type thing I can think of is just Batman, because I was the generation where the Tim Burton Batman movies were coming out. Like I was a little too young for the first one, really, but the Batman Returns. So, like I remember being really excited when that came out, and then the animated series started around that time. And so, yeah, as a kid, I was really into the Batman the Animated Series.
Classic series. Did you ever watch X-Men or Superman?
Yeah, and those were on at the same time too.
Yeah. No, and
for whatever reason, I never got into the Superman animated series or any like the rest of I guess what they call the DC animated universe. But yeah, it was just the Batman one, at least that was a big part of my childhood.
Do you consider that, because a lot of people have said this, do you consider that the greatest American cartoon ever, man? Because a lot of people have said that.
I'm probably not qualified to make a statement like that, but I mean, it's pretty good, I'd say. I think it still holds up today.
I think it does too, actually. I think that's one of the few that does still hold up. I think actually the 3 we mentioned, Superman, Batman, and X-Men, do still hold up. The Spider-Man cartoon, I like it, but for different reasons. I think it's amazing censorship. What that I didn't notice when I was like 10 was amazing, and just mind-boggling, as well as it's so fast-paced. Did you ever watch Spider-Man one?
Yeah, that was another one.
It was.
And I remember they had those robot spiders. And I had like the toy of those.
Yeah, the Spider Slayers.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah. No, and it's funny because I remember those toy or that show was basically like 2 hours crammed into 30 minutes because those episodes were breakneck fast. I mean, people were talking about how the Universe 6 arc and Super was fast. Those things were 10 times faster. So speaking of Dragon Ball, all right. You've mentioned in the past that you got into Dragon Ball because you saw it on accident. You saw Goku, in space. What was this? Can you tell us the story?
Yeah, not exactly by accident, but I was just randomly flipping through channels one day, and I saw I tuned in halfway through an episode, and one of the episodes where he's on his way to Namek and doing the gravity training in the spaceship. And so because this was maybe not my very first, but one of my first exposures to the show. Like I'd probably seen maybe like other random bits and pieces of it before then, but this was the first one I really remember, like concretely. Anyway, so because I didn't have any context for this scene, like I just assumed that Goku's natural environment was a spaceship, like that he was always in this spaceship just traveling the universe. Which I guess is, so essentially I thought that Z was GT, just because I tuned in at the wrong moment.
You heard, okay, so you thought Z was GT, so you already had, go ahead.
No, I mean, at the time I didn't think of it in those terms, but essentially I thought that Goku was like some type of Captain Kirk, spaceship captain who explored the universe all the time. That was like the premise of the show.
Yeah, yeah, and that became, it was only just for the one arc. So, were you a Star Trek fan before?
No, not really. No, I'm still not really into it. I mean, I don't hate it or anything, but I'm not a fan.
Now, you've always kind of been the kind of guy who's been into literature a lot. You read more manga than anime from what you've told us and what you've said. Have you always been like a reader? Were you always like a reader? Or were you a TV watcher that became a reader, or is it neither one?
Well, I've always watched TV and read, but yeah, I have read a lot always. And like as a kid, just reading through like Frankenstein and The Time Machine. Oh, War of the Worlds, that was a big one.
War of the Worlds, okay, well,
yeah, H.G. Wells, the book. It's essentially the first alien invasion story, or the one that really popularized the idea. And which was of course made into a movie starring Tom Cruise and featuring Justin Chatwin.
Yeah, ironically enough.
Yeah.
Goku, everything comes together. It's so weird. So, okay, so you discovered the series, dubbed, Ocean dub, I'm guessing?
Well, I don't like, yeah, I mean, it's like, so for the, like, I never really watched it consistently when it's just like the Namek arc or anything prior to that, so, like, I just saw all these random clips, and, like, another thing I thought was that somehow Gohan was Goku. Like, at some point I learned that Goku was a kid at one point and then became an adult. So I would see these other just scattered clips, and I got it into my head that Gohan was Goku as a kid, and that, like in the Saiyan arc when it's Goku training in the afterlife and then Gohan training on Earth. Like, I thought there was some kind of weird time travel thing going on where they were the same character.
Well, that's wacky, bro.
Yeah. I had And, yeah, I had a lot of weird ideas like that.
Well, I mean, that wasn't just you, though, man. All of us, because we didn't have the whole series there, and you had to piece things together. Like, I mean, when you first see Dragon Ball Z and then see Dragon Ball, if you're seeing it out of order, I've had people tell me they thought that Kid Goku was adult Goku's son. They confused him with Gohan. Like, I've seen people say that. Like, when you only see a little bit of stuff, it tends to be kind of confusing. Now we have everything available.
Yeah, and a little skipping ahead a little bit, but when I first saw when the Dragon Ball dub started airing, and I caught a scene where it was Pilaf is fantasizing about him ruling the world, but I didn't. So I saw this and I didn't know it was a dream sequence. So at that point, I did have a reasonable idea of, like, the overall arc of the story. But when I saw this, I assumed that at the start of the series that Pilaf legitimately was the ruler of the world and that Goku overthrew him.
Yeah, and then we find out that's a King Furry guy, but keep going.
Yeah, so I don't know what this says other than the fact that I had a tendency to jump to weird conclusions based on pretty much nothing. But anyway, so I saw all these random clips early on, and then I started consistently watching it on Toonami around the Android arc about midway through. And yeah, I remember early on, like, one of the things that kind of appealed to me is when the Trunks he's warning everyone about the androids, and how they destroyed his future, and just the idea that these two people, not like like as into War of the Worlds, where it's like these disaster stories where it's a invading army or some kind of big thing like that. But here it's like the entire world was destroyed by just these two people. And so I found that idea interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me, and it's true. And it's funny because in Super, it's also two people. Well, it's one guy. We know what I mean. So, so that's interesting because that tells me that you got into the game a little bit later than a lot of other people, especially some of your Kanzenshuu brethren. Because most of the stories that we hear is, Ocean dub, and then, discovering the internet and the tapes and, Mike's old website and all that stuff. Like, most of the older kind of generation got into it then, but you're saying that you saw a little bit here, a little bit there, and then it wasn't until the Android arc, which was technically, quote, season 4. Well, it was season 4 during the TV run. That's what really got you hooked. And did you end up at that point, like, buying the tapes? Like, how did you go back and watch the whole thing in order?
Yeah, well, like, yeah, I guess I am a generation or two generations older than, later fan generations than Mike or the other guys. But like I said, I was aware of it for a fairly long time before I actually became a fan. Like, I guess I did, like I said, I had all these very odd ideas about what it was like then, so I guess I didn't get into it because of that. And then finally, when I actually watched it, that's when I got hooked. But, I mean, so I watched it on TV for a while, and then eventually it was, like I said, I've mentioned this in past times when I've been on, but it was the Viz manga when I started collecting that I went from like something that I watched consistent, like I was enough of a fan to seek out the manga, but reading the Viz manga really took my fandom up to another level. And so instead of like I didn't collect DVDs at that point, I started collecting the manga volumes as they came out.
The singles.
Which was excruciatingly slow. At this, it's kind of easy to forget. In this day and age, all 42 Viz volumes have been out just for ages and ages. And, they've had all these different releases over the years. But at the time, it was like they came out, like each volume came out so slowly, and they were like so behind where the TV series was. Like they were ahead with the Red Ribbon arc. Like that came out in the Viz manga before it was on TV, at least. And so that was sort of an advantage for a while. But then, like they didn't complete the Boo arc until like ages and ages after all that stuff had aired on TV and was out on DVD.
Yeah, but it's funny because you were ahead of Dragon Ball, but the Z portion was pretty much done by then. It was that whole like retroactive thing. I wanted to ask you about this because I asked a lot of people this question and I really wanted to get your thoughts. Do you think, looking back, all right, we know that Dragon Ball Z is the biggest, I guess the most popular part of the series. Most of the video games and the promotion up until Super anyways, now they're pushing that a lot. But even to this day we see it, push the Z portion and kind of tend to ignore Dragon Ball. And even though part of me understands it, part of me is also somewhat annoyed by it. I wanted to ask you, do you think if they introduced Dragon Ball, and they did with the Ocean dub, first 13 episodes, I know all that stuff, but do you think if they had ran Dragon Ball, the entire 153, in the United States first, and then followed up with Z, do you think that would have changed, A, the perception of the series, and B, would it have been less popular? Do you think that there's something about Z's action that, that has something to do with it?
It's hard to say, but I mean, if they started from the very beginning and then went in order, then maybe that would have an effect. But I mean, when you talk about action, like the latter half of the original Dragon Ball anime,
fantastic.
Like the last from the 22nd tournament onward, all the action, it's just really great. Like in the Piccolo arc, I mean, it's essentially just DBZ already. It's got everything, just all the ki blasts and characters powering up. There's like no real difference other than the fact that we don't know Goku's an alien and Gohan's not around. Like the Vegeta, those are the last few pieces that really click into place when Z starts. But otherwise, there's like no real tonal difference.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you entirely, but I see a lot of people say that. They say, oh, man, Dragon Ball has no action. I'm like, have you watched Dragon Ball? Once the 21st Budokai begins, from then on, there's a lot of action.
So, like, I mean, I think if in some alternate universe where first they decided to rebrand the series with the Piccolo arc, like, I think if that had aired, then I think it would be as popular. If they kept with the earlier episodes, then maybe it would also have been as popular. But, I mean, there is those first 13 episodes. They are different than Z, but they're also different than the rest of the original Dragon Ball anime. Like, even like right away, like the very first tournament arc and all the training they do for it, like that shifts it away from just the pure adventure exploring thing, like straight into just martial arts and action right away.
Yeah.
Which also, it does mirror, I mean, this was intentional on Toriyama's part when he was making it, because when actually that very first Dragon Ball, the search for the Dragon Ball arc, at the very beginning, when that was running in Jump, the series actually wasn't very popular relatively.
Yeah.
And so that's when, Toriyama's editor was nagging him as like, you followed up your big Dr. Slump hit. We were expecting more from the series, so like you try and make it more popular. So Toriyama did, and that's when he thought up that's what he's like, tournaments, those are always popular, so I'll do a tournament and I'll add in more action. And so it's the shift from like pure comedy to action occurs very much earlier in the series than is generally assumed by a lot of people who think it just started with Raditz.
Yes, and again, that's something that's just, people have to go back and really analyze that. Regardless of the sales of Shonen Jump, I still think that it's blatantly obvious. Do you think, in your opinion, that Dr. Slump could work? Maybe not. Okay, two questions. Do you think Dr. Slump, had they dubbed it and brought it over here, do you think it would have worked then? And the second part of the question is, do you think it would work now? It's a tough one.
It would, well, yeah. Dubbing Dr. Slump is a
Tricky.
Pretty tough proposition because the humor is always very pun and cultural reference specific. So when Viz did the Dr. Slump manga, they had to adapt. They brought in the same team who did the Phoenix Wright games, which had a very heavy localization job because they had to change all the characters' names from jokes that worked in Japanese to jokes that worked in English and do all kinds of things like that. And that's the approach they took with the Dr. Slump manga too, where it is in many ways kind of a different story just by necessity, just because so much of the series doesn't even make sense. Like, you can't really directly translate things and have the jokes work, so they had to take a free hand with things, and so a dub would have had to do the same. So, I mean, they did have the Crayon Shinchan dub, which was very they changed it. Those that they did where it was they just added in all kinds of different jokes, and that, I guess, that was popular when it was on Adult Swim, wasn't it?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
So I don't know, maybe that would have worked, but I mean, the thing is, Dr. Slump, I think if it had gotten popular in the US, it would have been popular among a different audience than Dragon Ball Z, or at least it would have been popular for different reasons, because it is a very different series. There's a lot of commonalities between it and Dragon Ball that you can see, but at the same time, it is very different. It is all that slice of life, wacky gag stuff just from beginning to end, and all just no overarching plot lines ever. And I really love Dr. Slump, but I think its appeal is different than Dragon Ball. I think it does appeal to it. There's different things that are good about it. So I don't think you can necessarily predict I like them both, but I think it's legitimate to only like Dragon Ball and not like Dr. Slump, or vice versa. There are probably a lot of people who would only enjoy Dr. Slump or wouldn't necessarily find Dragon Ball Z to be their cup of tea.
Yeah, it's like Dr. Slump's more of a straight-up comedy, whereas Dragon Ball's got the elements of your Jackie Chan and your all the different inspirations of Toriyama. Let me ask you a question. How do you feel? Okay, so you got into the series, read the manga. Okay, well, I'm gonna ask you another question first, then we'll get back to this one that I had in my mind that you don't know what I'm talking about, but I'll tell you in a minute. Okay, when you read the manga, when did you start watching the series in Japanese? Did you end up watching them on the original DVDs that were released back in the day? Did you download the episodes? I know that it's taboo to say that now, but back then a lot of us did that because we were hungry for it. How did you end up watching the anime in Japanese with subtitles, I guess?
Yeah, so the first thing that I ever really got was these, I guess I was this might have even been before downloading took off, but the first thing I actually got was these, these bootleg DVDs that they had, which were, I think, actually bootleg
VCDs.
But I don't, maybe the time, I don't know if the timeline works out, but I seem to recall that these were bootleg Dragon Box DVDs. Although maybe they would have been too early for that. Anyway, you might have seen these where it's the cover is blue. It's the covers were always a character's face in yellow on a blue background. And it was each set, they had these sets. Each one was 27 episodes with 9 episodes on a disc. And it came with, in classic bootleg fashion, there were the Chinese subtitles and then the English subtitles, which were barely coherent half the time. And did stuff when they had King Yenma, they'd call him King Cold in the subtitles, which makes no sense. But it's weird. Not only did they get it wrong, but they got it wrong in a way that they knew there was a character called King Cold who had horns, and they, I guess, assumed this guy was the same guy, this other unrelated character with horns.
Oh, there's no excuse. I've got bootlegs where they call Vegeta Dende. Seriously. So yeah, I don't understand.
And the Kamehameha they called Roshi Cannon.
Yep. Or Turtle Cannon. It's another one.
Yeah, which is apparently a literal translation of what the attack is called in the in the official Chinese translation they call it that, and I guess literally they were just translating the Chinese subtitles into English.
Yes,
And
and
so,
that
yeah.
and that's one thing I do want to real quick explain to the people, because you and I know about that, but they might not. Back real quick, just back in the day when there was a lot of pirated anime. I mean, this still exists, obviously, but if you went to like flea markets or places like that, you'd find what Herms is talking about here, and they were basically from Hong Kong. They actually were called HK DVDs or whatever, and then you would, like you said, it would be subtitled in Chinese and in English, but the subtitles were so bad, and usually the transfer was bad too, because they would cram 12 episodes onto a disc, 9 to 12 episodes onto a disc sometimes, and really lower that bit rate. So yeah.
Yeah, so that was my first exposure to the anime in Japanese, and then eventually, like, at this point, I guess, like, I'd gotten involved not involved, but I'd been reading about the series online, and so I'd had heard like all this stuff, like, oh, the Japanese version is very different, so that's what made me, and even just like comparing the dub on Toonami to the Viz manga, I could see like, oh, there's these differences, and so that got me interested in seeing the Japanese version of the anime. And well, eventually I learned that the DVDs you could buy in like legitimate non-bootleg places, the actual Funimation DVDs had the Japanese version as well, and it was the same as, just like not altered in any way. So eventually I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I might as well get these then. But when by get them, I mean essentially like I was still just getting these as like Christmas presents and things like that. And so because these were the old school DVDs that Funimation put out, where it's 3 episodes a disc, or 4 if you're lucky. So it took me quite a long time to get like the whole series. And this was also back when they were still putting out the series on DVD, like in this very odd order, where the Boo arc came out before the Cell games. Like the Cell games, for whatever reason, were the last thing to actually be released on DVD.
You know, it's interesting, yeah, and you're right about that. Also, you got to point out how expensive they were back then, because they, Suncoast, 3 episodes for $25, man. This was not cheap. Collecting Dragon Ball Z was not inexpensive, aka it was expensive, man. I think it's funny because nowadays you go on Funimation now and you just sign up for like $7 a month. You can literally watch the entire series start to finish, dubbed and subbed. And back then it was like, no, brother, you're paying $25 at Suncoast for 3 episodes. Enjoy it, and that's all we had.
By the time I was collecting these DVDs, I was also too snobbish to want to watch the dub on TV, so it was sort of between a rock and a hard place. And so it took me like a really long time to see the Boo arc, because that came out, took forever to come out in the Viz manga, and I wanted to experience for the first time in Japanese, just because I was really kind of picky that way. Like for one Christmas, my Christmas list was just all of the Boo arc on DVD. And this was before years before the Orange Brick, so it was the original singles releases, like in box set form. So it was like 20 or so discs just for the entire arc. And so it was this like massive, it looked like this massive pile of DVDs. And so I just spent like that Christmas vacation, like just marathoning through the Boo arc for the first time.
That's pretty awesome. And by that time you were strictly watching it in Japanese with subs?
Yeah, so I was really, like, it took me a really long time to get to the Boo arc because it wasn't out in the Viz's manga, and I didn't want to watch it on TV because I was kind of snobbish at that point. So I wanted to experience it in Japanese for the first time. I mean, I wanted my first exposure to be the Japanese version. Which was very financially costly decision back in the day, but
yeah,
all on my parents because it was Christmas.
Well, that's very kind of them for sure, man. That's a great thing that they did that, because they helped, I think, increase your fandom. Let me ask you about something when it comes to that. So, in your opinion, how do you feel now as a grown man? How do you feel about animation or anime or anything being, quote, Americanized? I know it's very archaic, and it's something we saw a lot in the 90s. Nowadays, it tends to be kind of something in anime we rarely see, because the big companies try to stick to the original version more. How do you feel about the quote, Dragon Ball Z being Americanized? Do you think it's kind of a dumb mentality? Do you think it's smart business? Like, what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's almost too broad of a term because, as well, I think that localization is going to have to occur to some extent, just in general. So I think it's just a question of degree more than anything. Like,
I guess that's true.
yeah, I mean, there's the thing where, like, I guess the Pokemon dub, they turned onigiri into donuts or things like, or the Doraemon thing when that was coming out. Like, they just like last year or whatever, where they really extremely like change all Japanese foods into some American equivalent.
That's
And
yeah. Go
that
ahead.
seems maybe pushing it too far. Like I mean, it's a lot of effort on their part just to disguise this food. But I mean, I think stuff like that is maybe too extreme. But then on the other hand, of course, you've got like I don't think you should have honorifics in dubs. Like that's kind of like there are aspects of the culture that you kind of have to work around when just presenting an English version of the show, just because it's not going to translate at all. And I mean, if you include them, it's just going to like be incomprehensible to an English-speaking audience. So it's like it's kind of cliche, it's kind of trite to say, but I think there is a balance you need to strike.
No, I do see where you're coming from. It's just one of those things where I wanted to ask you because and we're going to get to your travels in a minute, but my thing has always been, like, personally, I just think that I understand why it was done back then. I get it. I do get it, but I don't like the idea of something being Americanized. It's not American. Like, I like the fact that if something is Italian, it's Italian. If something's Japanese, it's Japanese. I think that the world, and unfortunately we don't live in this magical utopia, but I think in my eyes the world should be completely open to all cultures. I think I feel that way, but it's just we still see it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I do think one of the benefits of watching shows from other countries is to be exposed to other cultures in a fun way. Like you can learn about other cultures through this medium of an entertaining show, which can maybe saying it broadens your mind is a bit extreme, but I think it is helpful. And it's like the sugar that makes the medicine go down, you could say. I mean, like just in any I've been in several different language classes at this point, and there's always a bit of just watching movies made from that country and TV shows as a way of getting into that culture. And so yeah, in that sense, like if you're only watching foreign things that have been made to be indistinguishable from things from your own country, then there's not really any inherent point in watching them instead of things that are from your own country in the first place.
Yeah, and there's so much good food and so much good entertainment that's multicultural. It's like I've been accused of calling certain people uncultured, and it's one of those things where it's not everybody who is a quote dub fan or any of that stuff. That's not what I mean by it. It's more so the fact that some people just don't like Japanese things in their Japanese anime, and I often just wonder, do they not understand that it's Japanese? Like, you have to accept these things. It's not like it's gonna offend your culture or your childhood, but some certain people just want everything to be Americanized, and I just don't get it, man. I just don't understand. I agree with you. What's the fun in that,
Yeah, and I mean, like, again, there's plenty of good American shows as well, so
tons. Batman, yeah, Simpsons, and the other thing too that's crazy is that personally, I feel that the word Americanized is somewhat of an insulting word towards Americans, because what they're basically saying is that Americans are dumb, they can't accept other cultures, they're closed-minded, and I think that's insulting to a lot of Americans. I just don't like that idea. But of course, we all know why they did that, way back when. Now, I wanted to ask you, back then, when you were younger, there's one thing you haven't mentioned at all about your fandom, and that's the internet. Were you on the boards back then? Were you on the Planet Namek site, the early Daizenshuu EX? Like, I know you wound up there, but I mean, were you on the web talking to fans and other fans of Dragon Ball back then, or was it something you just didn't really go and get into?
Well, yeah, I was on some of these websites. There was, is it Anime Nation? Yeah, that was it. Which was, I don't know if they're still around anymore, but it used to be this, there's a website where you just buy anime, and they also had forums. And so, they had forums, like a general anime forum, and then several like sub forums for specific popular franchises. And so I signed up there, and I was reasonably active in the Dragon Ball section they had there. And also they opened up around the time I was over there. That was when Funimation brought Yu Yu Hakusho to the United States, and so there was like this big push to get a Yu Yu Hakusho subform opened. And so like I was really like as a part of this, like at this point I hadn't seen Yu Yu Hakusho because it hadn't been brought over yet, but I was like, yeah, as like part of this movement on the forum to like get this new subform added. Like because I'd seen the 3 or so episodes that had aired at that point. I'm like, yeah, like this show looks pretty cool. And so I was active on that forum. And that was kind of my first exposure to like the older generations of fans who had like the exclusively Japanese fans, like these people who had been fans before there was any English dub of any sort whatsoever. And so, which was these guys who have kind of like throughout as years have gone by, they've kind of disappeared from the fandom in large part.
Yeah, that's unfortunate to me.
I mean, a lot, just moving on with their lives. But at the time, like, it was a sizable chunk of the fan community who just, like, their fandom predated the English dub. For them, it was just kind of this new thing, which, see, it's kind of, and, from their perspective, like, they'd been around, like, when there was no dub, and also when the dub had only dubbed a very small chunk of the series. So it's like, at that phase, like anyone who had only seen the English dub had, by definition, only seen like the Saiyan arc or the Namek arc, like
a small piece, yeah.
Yeah, so there was a kind of, I mean, it wasn't. They could be elitist, which was unfortunate, but at the same time, there was their perspective where it's like, by definition, like all these people who have only seen the English version, they've only been exposed to a very small slice. Which we've kind of lost, like, I mean, by definition, as more and more of the series was made available in English, that argument, it didn't really make sense anymore. But I guess that's kind of, I oddly enough come round to that again with Super, where for the longest time that wasn't available. I mean, the dub's coming at last, but we still don't even have that now. And of course, I mean, Super, it's only 65 episodes versus 508 of the rest of the series.
But it's interesting. But it's interesting because I feel like a lot of us went through that elitist phase, and once in a while we regress into it. Like a lot of the older fans, have it's just something that you kind of do. Like it's not even just in anime. Those people that well, I was a fan of that band before they were famous. That whole thing. Now that they're famous, I knew them before you did. It's just kind of funny that I saw a lot of that during that era because Linkin Park blew up right around that time. I'm not even going to get into the whole Linkin Park DBZ AMV thing, but it's interesting because I knew people back then who, after Hybrid Theory came out or whatever, there were people who were like, well, I knew Linkin Park before they were famous. And it's like the same thing with anime, I feel like. That's we just kind of part of growing up, I guess, right?
Yeah, and so I guess where I'm going with this is that it was this exposure on that forum to the perspective of these older fans that was a part of me becoming interested in the Japanese version, like that and the Viz manga, and other different things like that. And so I was on those forums, and then I was also my first specifically, well, it wasn't even a specific Dragon Ball fan site, but my first fan site that I was into was, I don't know if I can even remember the name of it. It was like L'Oreal, something with an L, and it wasn't even a particularly popular site. It was just this. The kind of personal fan site that people had back in the olden days that nowadays you just have a YouTube channel. But it was so there was this person's site, and it was just they had sections on the 5 or so different anime series that they happened to like. Like there's no organizing principle to it beyond well, here's a series I like and here's another one. So they had pages on all Dragon Ball Z and GT, on I can't. El Hazard, that was it. Which another series you don't really hear much about these days. The Mysterious Play.
Oh, from Shi Yugi. I love that series, man. By the way, just so you know, the other day on Twitter, you talked about how you Serial Experiments was the first one that you had ever bought. I popped for that, man, because I haven't seen that in 15 years.
Oh, yeah. So that's another thing. Yeah, the very first anime DVD I got wasn't even Dragon Ball or anything. It was Serial Experiments Lane.
Yeah.
which is this very odd show from the late 90s. It's like kind of cyberpunk, kind of. It's very difficult to describe.
Yeah.
And it was 13 episodes, and I'd heard about, like, again, from the Anime Nation forums, like, this was a series I got talked about a lot, so I'm like, well, I better get that. And, you know, it's only 13 episodes, so it was a relatively easier thing to buy at that stage, even though, even at 13 episodes, it was 4 separate discs. And, you know, I had to save up and buy each one, you know, so I watched each chunk of episodes, like, weeks or months apart. And it's like this plot is hard enough to, it's like this David Lynch anime type thing. The plot's hard enough to follow on its own, but like every time I'd like during that month, I'd like watch and rewatch that chunk of episodes and try and work out a theory on what the heck was going on. And then I'd get to the next volume, and then like anything I thought would be completely upended.
It's funny because that's kind of a fun thing to do, though. Like, there's not a lot of shows that really provide that.
Yeah, and I mean, especially today, like we just get everything at once. Like, they release entire seasons on Netflix all at once. So, you know, just having all that time to just chew over it. We've kind of gotten a little bit back to that with Super coming out week by week. But even then, like, you know, this was like just a month or two just on a specific chunk of episodes.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I was really into that, and because of that, the guy who is like the mastermind behind that series is Chiaki J. Konaka, who also he did a couple other series, and he was the writer on the third series of Digimon, Digimon Tamers. So it's like weird where like you wouldn't on the surface connect these series in any way, but like when you watch them, it's like they have these same themes, and even like he reuses character names between the two series.
Yeah.
And that was, I guess I haven't mentioned that, but I was also into Digimon back in the day, and still to a certain extent. But like I think that was something I was into even before Dragon Ball. Well, Digimon and Pokemon and all that stuff.
The monster catching was like your thing before Dragon Ball. See, that's interesting. I'm glad you said that because there's not a lot of people who know that about you. I didn't even know that about you. That you were into that stuff prior too. Because most of the time it was the other way around. It was Dragon Ball, Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball, and then Pokemon. But now you're saying no. For you, it was different. Did you ever watch Ranma or Sailor Moon or any of those?
A little bit of pieces. I never was like a consistent fan, but I didn't really get into Ranma until maybe just the last 5 years even, because I happened to pick up all the manga volumes for super cheap.
Yeah.
And so I just had a blast like reading through that. It's one of those things where it's like, why didn't I get into this decades ago?
It's funny because people still talk about Yu Yu Hakusho, but not as many talk about Ranma. And Ranma was just right in there, like right during that era. Can you compare, in your opinion, Toriyama to Togashi?
I mean, it's hard to do, but I mean, Togashi seems like he's he seems to have like ambition, like not exactly quasi-literary ambitions. I don't know if that's the best way of phrasing that. He has concerns. He's trying to do things with his stories beyond just entertain.
Yeah.
And it comes through. I mean, he still wants it to entertain, of course, but he's kind of trying to push the envelope more than Toriyama, who kind of defaults to the kind of just simple gag stuff. And he's also, I mean, his art style is, I think it's not like Togashi has bad art, but I think his writing is maybe better. Like, his art is extremely inconsistent, which I guess has to do with his health problems. But compared to, like, I think Toriyama, his number one, like, the top of, like, his talents is the character design and artwork. And I think that's what that kind of the glue that binds everything together with Toriyama, whereas I guess Togashi, it's kind of, he's
more of a storyteller? Is that
or I don't know, there's a certain, the sensibility there, like the kind of dark worldview he has that gets into everything.
Yeah, he does tend to go in that direction, I've noticed. That's a good point.
But I think that's that's what is driving him ultimately. I think I'd heard he originally wanted to be a horror manga author, and then he got kind of sidelined into doing the shonen stuff.
Yeah, I actually didn't know that about him. That's interesting. I mean, he's got 2 great series, and he can sleep on that one forever. Were you a big video gamer when you were younger? Were you really into that kind of stuff?
Yeah, kind of. Well, with Pokemon, I picked up got into the game, and then I actually never even really got into the anime at all. Like, it was.
What about the manga with Red?
Oh, I actually did. Viz, yeah, the Viz was also putting out the Pokemon manga, which was, I guess, I didn't know this at the time, but it's localized by the same guy who handled Dragon Ball. What is his name? Glenn Jones, I think it is.
Yeah.
Like, so he's the guy who's like most responsible overall for the tone of the Viz manga translation, and I guess he also did they called it the Electric Tale of Pikachu. And so I picked up a few issues of those, and then for whatever reason, like I think the anime was just never on at the right time for me for some reason, and for whatever reason I never really watched it.
It came on at weird times for me too, actually, like Sunday morning at like 6 a.m. I think, but it was syndication, so I mean it was different for everybody.
Yeah, and so I was really into the Pokemon games, and I guess from that I got into not ironically, but oddly, getting into the Pokemon games got me into the Digimon anime. Because apparently that fit my schedule, and so that was the series I ended up watching a lot.
And they never really did Digimon games to the degree of Pokemon. I mean, obviously Pokemon was a game first, but I mean, I noticed that it was almost like the Digimon was primarily an anime. I never even read the manga.
It started out as like a kind of Tamagotchi, not a ripoff. This is made by the same people who made Tamagotchi, just Bandai. But so they thought like, oh, let's make a Tamagotchi where you can fight, and so they did that, and then they branched out into a manga for like a bunch of other products, including a manga, and then eventually the TV series.
And it just went from there. Yeah. So other than Pokemon, was there any other favorites back then, game wise, that you were into that you remember?
Yes. Let's see. Oh. I guess one of my favorite games was this thing called HOURS Adventures.
Really? I haven't heard that in years.
I'm surprised you know about it, actually.
Of course. On PS1.
Yeah, and I had the Sega Saturn version, but this was it's made by by LucasArts, but they did a similar earlier. They put out a game called Zombies Ate My Neighbors.
That's a classic, bro.
Yeah, that's much better known, and where it's like Zombies Ate My Neighbors is just every B movie stuck together, and so HOURS Adventures was like the same thing but for Greek mythology, and as a kid I was hugely into Greek mythology and mythology in general, and so this game is just right up my alley. It was a humorous take on the whole thing. Yeah,
it was like Herc, Jason, and Atlanta, and it was like really wacky. Yeah, it was a lot like Zombies Ate My Neighbors. Actually, we meant. Yeah, that is a good.
So you wander around this cartoon version of Greece, and you can pick up houses and throw them. And my favorite part is when you die, you actually go to the afterlife, and you have to fight your way back up to the living world. And essentially, this keeps happening. Like you get I think it's like 5 or 6 tries, and like each time you die you get put further and further back in the afterlife, so you have further to go, and you have you can't die in the afterlife, but if your HP lower, like if you die you immediately come back but with lower HP, because there's kind of some RPG elements in the game. So there's like a disadvantage to dying while dead, but it's not like huge. But anyway, so eventually you get a series of chances, but eventually you just get permanently locked up in the afterlife, and that's game over. But I just thought that was the greatest thing is when you die, you go to the land of the dead and you have to come back out again. That's still my favorite ways of a video game handling that.
And it's also, not only is that awesome, but it relates to Dragon Ball and Yu Yu Hakusho, because it's we see that a lot in those shows.
Yeah, it's the same kind of system.
Yeah, we see it a lot. So let's talk about you kind of getting into language and linguistics and things like that. Now, when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up, bro? What did you want to do when you were younger?
I'll probably actually just be a cartoonist.
Like an animator?
Yeah, but not an animator. Just draw comic strips.
I see.
another thing I was into was Garfield and The Far Side,
I
especially.
love The Far Side, bro.
Calvin and Hobbes, and also I never pronounce his name right, but Gahan Wilson.
I actually don't know what you're talking
Who
about.
is well, so Gahan Wilson he's kind of like the Far. Well, he was around before The Far Side, but it's the same kind of macabre humor, and he's actually in Playboy. Like that's where he got known for. But as a kid, I didn't see his things in Playboy. I actually saw, like, when I was in bookstores, I just saw collections of his books, and I got collections of his comics, and I got into him that way. But he's really funny.
Well, it's interesting because you're into strips and you're into manga. Were you ever into and Batman, the animated series? But were you ever into American comics like DC, Marvel?
Oh, so one thing, yeah, oddly, as a kid, like I was into the Batman show, but not the comics. Like except like at one Christmas when I was really young, my parents got me as a Christmas gift a Batman comic, thinking about, like, well, he likes Batman, this should be perfect. And they obviously didn't give it a read through at all, because it was Batman versus Predator, oddly enough. Weird crossover they had, but it was fairly violent. Like,
yeah,
even as a kid, I'm like, this probably isn't quite what I was expecting. It wasn't. I didn't like it. It just seemed a little out of keeping, but I don't know if that. Yeah, it was not for my age level, but still, it was an interesting read anyway. And it's just, also, I don't know why.
Wow.
Like, thinking about it now, I'm not sure why they'd have Batman versus like those two universes don't really coexist. But anyway, so yeah, that was like my only real exposure, except for a few other random things, just to like Batman or the American comics. I wasn't into too much, except a little later on though. Okay, so because I was into these superhero things on like the movies and TV, I would buy Wizard magazine.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, and so I'd read that, like, even though, like, so I'd read about comic books, but not read the actual comic books for some weird, reason, and, it made sense at the time, I guess. I couldn't afford, I could only afford this one magazine, so I just buy that rather than the actual comics. But, well, I was into also the Sonic the Hedgehog Archie comics that were coming out. Because, video game-wise, Sonic the Hedgehog was another one.
Oh, man, dude, those Sonic Archie comics, I had a long convo with Moogie the other day about that. What were you going to say?
Yeah, and, so when I was a kid, it's like everyone in my neighborhood had one Sonic game, but, so we'd have to, one of us had Sonic 2, another had Sonic the first one, another had Sonic and Knuckles. So, we'd have to get together to actually, play through them all.
It's like Pokemon Red and Blue.
Yeah, like that kind of thing. Anyway, so with Wizard, let's see, so this would probably be a few years after that, but when I was reading Wizard, it was when the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen comic was starting up, which was Alan Moore. So before there's the fairly crappy movie with Sean Connery, but before that, and still even now, I guess, there's the comic book series by Alan Moore and Kevin O'Neill.
Yes.
And so, it's all these literary characters kind of tossed up, a team with Mina Murray from Dracula and Mr. Hyde, the Invisible Man, like these Victorian era characters. And anyway, so this was like the big, it's like Alan Moore's first comic in a while, I guess. Or it's his big one at the moment anyway. And so that was kind of when I first heard about Alan Moore, was Wizard covering League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. And so I went out and got that. And so I got into that series. And so that was kind of my gateway into other Alan Moore works. So even now, he's a British comic writer, but most of my Western, my non-Japanese comics I've read are probably Alan Moore or people in that circle.
So I'm presuming that you love Watchmen and The Killing Joke? Presuming.
They're actually not. I mean, I like Watchmen, but so the thing is, that was one of the last Alan Moore things I got to, because I'd heard so much about, it's it's the greatest thing in the history of the universe, and so that actually kind of put me off to it. And so when I did read it, and I've read it a few times, but I like it, but it's I have no emotional connection to it, because it was it was always presented to me as this thing that's just kind of obligatory.
Obligatory, yeah.
Yeah, obligatory, and like whereas like I still have a strong connection to League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and like if you ask me my favorite Alan Moore story, I'd probably still say that. Like particularly Volume 2 of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which is centered around War of the Worlds.
Yes.
Which I'd already loved. Like, I loved the book as a kid, so this was, just right in my wheelhouse. But so like his From Hell.
See me dance the polka.
Yeah,
I remember that, but no, keep going. From Hell.
Yeah, and From Hell, like, which I think I maybe say is his best, like just on a literary level. And the Jack the Ripper one, which was also made into a terrible movie. Well, actually, okay, the From Hell movie is better than the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen movie, anyway. Or say that. But
wait, yeah, that's a fact. No, so people consider Watchmen like this great piece of literature, and it kind of is. But it's weird that the movie got so much flack when the movie is like a page by page. It just doesn't work for a movie. It works better for a book. I feel honestly.
Yeah,
for Watchmen.
It was very intentionally made that way as something like here's stuff you can only do in a comic book that you can't really do in other mediums. And so when you take that story and just do it as a movie, like it doesn't, even though it's the same story, because it's a different medium, all the stuff that actually makes the story interesting for the most part doesn't translate. I mean, I think the Watchmen movie actually turned out decent. It's not a terrible movie. It's not. I enjoyed watching it, but it's not I wouldn't consider it a classic. It could have been so much worse. Like I think we dodged a bullet to a certain. If they had to make a Watchmen movie, then I'm kind of glad it turned out the way it did.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. So, how did you get into? Because you wanted to be a cartoonist, but eventually, I guess you segued into language. How did you get into? Okay, you're watching, a lot of anime at this point. Is that your gateway drug into learning Japanese? How did you get interested in learning Japanese?
Yeah, so I always wanted to, like, just as I'm going through anime, I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if I could actually learn this language? And one thing I'd done was, taking it back to Digimon, I'd imported these Japanese Digimon games that had only come out on this system called the Wonder Swan.
Oh, that's a very obscure system.
Yeah, it's ridiculously, obscure. Like there's these series of games that deal with the character. I think it's Ryo.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. So it's this character who's actually he eventually made his way into the TV series just because he's so popular from these games, which are only popular in Japan because they weren't released anywhere else.
Yeah, the Wonder Swan was a big deal over there.
Yeah, because not only were the games not released, but the system that plays the games was only released in Japan. And so because I don't know how, I was always wasting thinking back now to the absurd things I'd spend my limited financial resources as a child on, the top of the list is buying a Wonder Swan to play these fairly mediocre games just because I was just intrigued. Like they were hyped up within the Digimon community to the extent that there was a online Digimon community.
So you actually owned a Wonder Swan. That's crazy. Because Final Fantasy 1 and 2 were remade on that system first, and they look beautiful. I've never known anybody to actually own a Wonder Swan that wasn't in Japan. That's crazy.
Yeah, and I've still got it around somewhere or other, but so I played it. I got these games, and so at that point I'm like, well, I started learning Japanese just to try and play these games. I didn't really go anywhere at the time. Initially, I didn't make much progress besides learning the katakana and hiragana.
Yeah.
And a few kanji.
So you were self-taught at this point, correct?
Yeah. I went to the bookstore, Barnes & Noble, back when, we still have Barnes & Nobles at some places, but this was back when bookstores were still reasonably a thing that was relevant. And so I went to my local bookstore and got a kanji dictionary, which also included a run through of the katakana and hiragana. And so I just taught myself from that. And I was going off. Oh yeah, another thing so Cowboy Bebop, another series. I was all that stuff that was on Toonami or Adult Swim.
Trigun and all Outlaw Star.
Yeah, I'm kind of stereotypical in that way, but so I remember teaching myself katakana, and then on TV, it's the dub, but the eye catch, the thing they play before the commercials for Cowboy Bebop, it has like the name of the series in alphabet letters and also katakana. And so I'd like go off of that. Like I was trying to, like I know what it's supposed to, like I was teaching myself that way, but like looking at stuff where I knew it was supposed to say in English already and kind of correlating it. Except at the time, like this is a little so in katakana there's a character which is normally on its own it's just the ts sound, tsu, but when it's small it doubles the vowel, not the vowel, the consonant sound that comes after it. So like for instance in Nappa's name, it's there's the katakana for an na, which is one character, and then this tiny ts, and then pa, which turns it from one P to two P's, essentially.
Really?
Anyway, so yeah,
so it's not pa. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But at the time, and you don't really pronounce the character, the thing in the middle, the tsu character on its own, like it's not supposed to be pronounced. It just in this case they just use it's the same. It's just one of those random language things where they happen to use this thing for completely different usage in this certain context. But at the time, I didn't know this because I'm teaching myself. Like, I'm not looking at like grammar or like language rules. I'm just going off of this chart that shows how these different characters are supposed to be read. So I'm trying to transliterate the Cowboy Bebop title, and so it comes out in like I thought it was saying Cowboy Bebop because the last P is doubled, but. Yeah, it's like I was thinking, like, why? Like, I understand everything except, like, this random ts sound in the middle. Like, what's that about? So it was, like, sometime afterwards where I actually learned how that was supposed to work.
So, but, of all things, that stumped you.
Yeah, well, and you still see, like, it's still, like, you still see people get this wrong every now and then. Like, sometimes it's not, if the printing is kind of small, you might not even be able to tell if it's normal size or not. Like, but anyway, so that was like just a vivid memory I have of just my first attempts at the language. And then another thing, like I also look at Digimon cards online because like they just have these pages where it's just galleries of the cards where they'd have the character and then the name written in katakana. And so I'd use that, like I'd use that to try and teach myself katakana, because I'd already kind of know what the name was supposed to be, or if it wasn't a Digimon I was familiar with, I could kind of guess just based on how it looked. Like I remember there's this pirate one who is called Hookmon, but it took me a while to work that out because, like, if you literally transliterate the characters, it's just Fuku.
Fuck you.
It's like yeah. It took me well. I mean, it's like huku, and because another thing is that the FH and UH they use the same character both for the H and F sounds.
Yeah.
I mean, not that's not right. Wait. Yeah. Sorry, I'm getting
Japanese.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, it took me a while to work out, like, kind of almost have to say it out loud, like, phonetically, this is an approximation of a Japanese approximation of the English word hook.
I mean, would you say that Japanese is the most challenging language to learn from an English point of view because of how complicated it is?
There's, it's not the most, but it's up there with, there's Chinese and Korean and other things like that. They list, like, they actually divide languages up into categories based off that. You've got, like, the lowest level, there's stuff like for an English speaker to learn, like there's Spanish and French are like the easiest, and then the next level up there's like German, which is there's still kind of similarities, but the grammar there's more differences compared to French for instance, and then above that is like Russian, which is even more, and then you get to Russian, it's pretty different, but they still have and the alphabet's fairly, they're still different, but there's some similarities at least, like some of the letters are the same. But then you get to like the highest levels where you get Chinese and Japanese, things which just have no relation to English at all, except for the many English words that they've imported in Japanese's case.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, where would you rank like, or does it even on the list, like Sanskrit and things like that, like some of the older languages? Like, would that even be on the list?
Let's see.
Or like classic
I
Anglo-Saxon?
don't really know. Yeah, I don't really know anything about Sanskrit, really. I mean, I know what it is, but I don't know how it ranks in there. And oh yeah, have you ever tried reading like the original, like Beowulf or the Canterbury Tales, just in like their original form?
I did it in high school, bro. It's a pain in the ass.
Where it's like theoretically, it's theoretically speaking, this is English, but just from hundreds of years ago, you can see how the language has changed.
Significantly. It's significantly changed. It's like almost like a different language. I mean, it's there, but it's like not there.
It's almost literally by this point. But anyway, so at first, like I was just learning. There's a period, like maybe a year, I think, or so, where I just taught myself the kana and a few of these kanji, and then during this period, oh yeah, I should mention, like, so during another Christmas gift was I actually got my.
You had some good Christmases, bro. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, like this was a central aspect to my early fandom was Christmas.
Well, it's right around the corner now. Well, who knows what you're gonna get now?
Yeah, so I got my parents somehow. To this day, I'm not entirely sure how this happened, but I got my parents to get me a Kanzenshuu, 2 Kanzenshuu, which Kanzenshuu 1 and 4. Which is the one is the just the art gallery, just all Toriyama's color artwork from the series, and then 4 is the world guide.
Yeah.
Which has the map of Dragon Ball Earth and all that stuff, and like for some reason, like I'd found a site that would just sold Kanzenshuu 1 regularly, just as an ordinary item. Like I guess somehow the supply of that one book was high enough for them to do that. But yeah, Kanzenshuu 4 was out of print, and so I found an eBay auction, and I told my dad, like, okay, this is the thing I want, this eBay, this auction, this item here. And so he's like, well, okay, no promises or anything, but I'll do what I can. And so on Christmas Day, he got me. So it turns out, like,
you had some cool parents, bro. That's all I'm gonna say about that.
Like,
Jesus.
I'm very fortunate with my upbringing.
Yeah.
And, yeah, no complaints there. But so on Christmas Day, I opened up this thing, and it was this like very tiny, like it was like a memo pad, or I think it was like some kind of tiny day planner thing. But it was a Dragon Ball Z day planner from Japan, where it's like just this tiny book with Dragon Ball Z characters on the cover, and not the pages, but there's nothing inside. You were supposed to write your own stuff in there. And so my dad's like, yeah, this is what you wanted, right? And like, no, but then, and anyway, he let this go on for a while. But the joke was, like, then he gave me the actual Kanzenshuu 4 because apparently, like, the guy he had bought it from had sent this additional item just as a bonus.
Your dad sounds cool, bro.
Yeah, that's
Of course, I picture him looking just like you, except with a beard. But because nobody knows what you fucking look like, it's just a white spot with a beard.
Yeah, well, that's close, I guess. But
close. That's pretty awesome, man, that you got that Kanzenshuu of all things. But continue.
Yeah. And so I had this book, and this was back before I had any real Japanese ability. So I could go through this book and like know the proper nouns basically, and that was it. But I used it, looking through it, I kind of used it to teach myself a bit more of the language. Like I remember like one of the first kanji I learned was the kanji for God. Like, Kami, Shin, and also the Shen and Shenlong.
We went through that whole thing in the video once.
Yeah, that whole thing. And anyway, but because because it's such a prominent character in the series, used in a lot of characters' names, that was one of the first ones I picked up on. And the Ma for demon and a lot of these weird things. But and I even tried to like translate passages, but I didn't, I still at this point had hardly any grasp of grammar. But another cool thing though was, okay, so getting back to my father, when he was a businessman, and he had actually he'd gone to Japan for business trips back in the day, and so he happened to have from then this leftover Japanese dictionary. It was another dictionary, but it had a section going over grammar as well. So my first exposure to grammar, he didn't even tell me about this. Like, I just found it lying around in his is somewhere, just random spot in the house. I'm like, oh, this is interesting.
This is destiny right here, bro.
Yeah. So I was going through that, and that was my first exposure to the grammar. And so I'd go I'd look something up. I'd learn a passage from this this very bare bones grammar thing, and then I go through the Daizenshuu and like try and spot instances of that.
Yeah, you try to match it up, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you pretty much self-taught yourself the elementary stuff.
Yeah, and so there was a period where I didn't have too, it was just that kind of self-study thing. But then eventually I was at this, so one summer I was at this summer school thing, and I'd actually originally signed up to take a Greek mythology class because that was one of my interests. Again, one of my interests. But then at the last moment I saw that, they're also offering Japanese language study. And so I switched immediately to that. And so
Sold out the Greeks.
Yeah.
So that was your thing.
Yeah, and so I took this absurd college. I was still in high school at this point, but it was like it's one of those things where it's like, get a taste of college while you're still in high school kind of thing.
Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about.
It was set up as a college class. And in fact, it was set up as like this crazy advanced, like a fast track learning kind of thing, because it's like it was 2 months, so pretty much most of my summer, so all day it's like you're going to college, but your only class is learning Japanese essentially. So it's like this not a full day, but there's a lot of Japanese. It's supposed to compress 2 semesters of college Japanese into 2 months. And so it's like this crazy, like every day, like learn all this vocab and go over all this stuff. And it was like, in a lot of ways, it was not a fun summer, but I learned a lot. And like at the end of the day, like I came out of it with this pretty good, solid foundation of Japanese knowledge. And, I think like I wouldn't have, I think obviously it was a big help that I'd spent all this time before then, like, studying language on my own. And then, but also there were other people in the class, there were a lot of people who already knew Chinese or Korean, and that was a kind of leg up.
Yeah, they had an advantage on you.
Yeah. So at the class, like they had that advantage. I mean, not everyone was like Chinese or Korean learner, but a lot of them, like, it was a kind of a trend. But my advantage in class was that because I had spent all this time going over katakana, the thing used for foreign words, because of that, like I was always the best at like figuring out what foreign word was being approximated in the katakana. So we'd have exercises where it's like, here's various English words written in Japanese. Like, can you figure out what they are? And it sounds like it should be easy, but just because the 2 languages are so different, when it's a sound is approximated in Japanese, it can be hard to work. You have to, there's like a set of rules you kind of have to know. And so like for instance, there was one, like I remember waffle, like one of the words was waffle, and I was the only one to pick up on that, like just immediately like, oh, that's waffle. And so it's like called my waffle power, like my ability to just figure out what English words were being meant in these katakana spellings.
But do you like waffles? That's what everybody's going to be asking.
Yeah, they're okay.
They're all right. So you were basically, you aced in the translation of English to Japanese, sort of like the approximations. That was your best. I guess your I don't even know how to even word it. Like your best subject matter expert kind of thing.
Yeah, well, that was what I was good at in the class, and then listening was kind of a challenge, and then those like listening and speaking were harder, and reading, just because in general I like to read, that's always been my main, like my strongest area.
Yeah, you aced that. Now, when did you make the decision to study abroad and actually learn the language and go to Japan? Like how did that come about?
And so, so this was in, like, I took this summer class, like in the middle of high school. And then after that, like, I spent the rest of high school just continuing my self-study of Japanese. And then so I got to college, and I took this. So the college I went to, they had Japanese courses, so I signed up for that. And I was pretty, it was kind of hard to correlate, okay, what level Japanese do I sign up with? Because I think I kind of signed up for the intermediate because I kind of already covered the beginning lessons. And actually, they didn't even, I signed up for the intermediate classes. And even then I was kind of just from all this other studying, I was at a pretty good place. I learned a lot, but I felt like I was kind of, it was a fairly easy class for me just because a lot of it was already stuff I had known just from either my earlier class or self-study. And so, so I wanted to take the advanced classes, but they they were theoretically on the curriculum, these upper level Japanese classes, but there was never enough demand for them at this, this kind of small Midwestern college. So that's why I'm like, so there weren't Japanese classes, but they did have this kind of deal with, they had this good Japanese exchange program going because, so this college I was going to is Jesuit University. And in Tokyo, there's a Sophia University, which was a college founded by Jesuits. Jesuits, there's this Catholic religious order. They're, big missionaries. And there's a big, the Jesuit missionaries played an important role, just like spreading Christianity and knowledge of Western things in general into Japan. And so kind of as a result of that, one of the fairly well-known colleges in Tokyo is Sophia University. And so it was kind of this, they had this kind of deal where people from my college could go to study at Sophia. And so that's what I did is in my junior year of college. So, and you see, by that point, I'd been studying, just Japanese. It would have been 4 years, yeah, pretty much. And so, yeah, I spent that year in Tokyo.
So you refined your skills there, I presume.
Yeah. And a lot of, so yeah, in Tokyo, it wasn't quite as hardcore just because the college, Sophia University's, one of their things is that they have a campus taught in English, all the classes are taught in English, where it's actually, the idea being that the Japanese students can go attend these English classes and improve their English skills.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't really even allowed to take Japanese I wasn't allowed. I had Japanese language classes, which were in Japanese, but all the other classes I taught were taught in English. I was taking economics, history, all that stuff.
Yeah,
and
because you were from the U.S., right?
Yeah, and so it wasn't like I was going to a Japanese college and everything was being taught to. I wasn't taking these subject matter, these college level subject matters being taught in Japanese. But still, at the same, I was taking these advanced Japanese classes anyway, these Japanese language classes, and then taking these English, history, and all the standard college stuff, taking that in English. And then apart from that, on my own, I was just, living in Tokyo and Japan, traveling through Japan and just having wacky adventures and all that stuff.
I was going to ask you, did you seem like you enjoyed your time there? Very much so. What kind of adventures did you get into, man? You just discovering that country must have been so crazy to actually be there,
Yeah, one of the things I was really fond of the rail system, and I just go and select just pick random towns and just take the train there and then get out and see what was there. And so I was actually it's probably fairly annoying to the local Japanese people because instead of I was essentially a tourist who was a tourist not in tourist spots but in just random neighborhoods. But so looking back on it, it's not like I was trespassing on private property or anything, but at the same time I was kind of just in weird spots, just wandering around seeing what interesting things I could see.
You were just trying to essentially gather together a full aspect of the culture versus just the tourist spots that are made for the Americans, kind of thing, right?
Yeah, kind of. And there were things I do where I'd just be wandering down a street and then I'd see oh, here's a Buddhist temple and they've got this one of those big bells with, and I'd just walk up and move. They had the big mallet that crashes into the bell to ring it. And I saw there's no one around, and I could see that I could you strike this bell. So I just walked up and striked it and then went away. And there was also, one of my favorite things was the town of, Saruhashi, which is Monkey Bridge. Literally, I just, for a while, I'd seen this spot called, when you go to the train station, the subway station, in Japan, they have the big map of all the different stations you can go to with the place names. And so I saw that, like, oh, here's a place called Monkey Bridge. And like, I wonder if they have a monkey bridge. Like, why is it called that? I have no idea. But it was like really far away, like from where I was. So like it was a while before I like decide, like I had to make a day trip of it essentially. Like, well, it wasn't quite that far, but like it was, God, maybe, I think it was 2-hour train ride to get there. And so eventually when I was like, okay, I'll go, like today's the day I go to see Monkey Bridge. And so I went there, and it did turn out that there was indeed a bridge, like it's over this gorge. And I guess because there were a lot of monkeys in the woods, they had built this bridge and called it Monkey Bridge, and they had monkey statues and all this monkey themed stuff everywhere.
Yeah, like monkey related stuff to match up with the lore or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's when I describe it like that, it sounds kind of campy, but it was like this old spot. It was very cool looking, like it seemed like just this old kind of wooden bridge. And
yeah,
so,
it's very cultured. It's more about like, it's not about the tourist stuff. It's more about like what's there and how old it is type thing. Like very historical, I guess the word is that we're talking about here.
Yeah, well, maybe not a historical spot, but it was a very interesting spot. But well, it was actually a tourist spot for Japanese people essentially, because while I was there, like there was this Japanese tour bus essentially rolled up in there's this restaurant that's like right by there where they serve like monkey ramen and stuff like that. And so I was eating there. And
wait a minute, what is monkey ramen? Is that like, it's not monkey brains, is it?
No, it's essentially just their local flavor. I mean, they have that kind of, it's udon. Like everything at this place had like monkey stuck on the front. Like it
was a gimmick.
Yeah, so that part was kind of cheesy, but they just had that kind of theme going. Anyway, so I was at this shop, this restaurant, and like all these while I was there, all these tourists from a bus came in, but there's all these Japanese people. It was like this. It was kind of like a spot that was for like, it was like a spot for Japanese tourists, but I didn't see like during this whole trip I didn't really see any other any other Western people there. And anyway, so while I was there, it started raining like really heavily, and so I'm at this, and so the people there, they actually the restaurant owners are like, oh, you can borrow one of our umbrellas. And so I was kind of hesitant because like I think they thought that I was part of this tourist group, or okay, like I thought like this group, they were probably lived closer than I did. Okay, it's a little hard to explain, but essentially I thought that the owners were giving me this umbrella on the assumption that I would at some point come and give it back.
Borrowing
and then, like, yeah, like even though like this spot, like this place, it was really, really far out of my way, and I didn't really plan on ever coming back. Just even though it was a great spot, but it's like a really big trip. Like actually, even walking, like it was a long train ride, and then from there, like walking to the spot, it was a pretty long walk. Because I was also, didn't have a car in Japan, obviously, and I didn't want to take a taxi, so they probably didn't even have taxi. It was kind of a rural area.
Were you living on campus?
Kind of like well, there's a dorm room for Sophia University, but it was actually in this suburb. It wasn't with the campus. It was kind of in the suburb. So the main campus of Sophia University, it's in kind of the middle, the central urban area of Tokyo. And then the place I was at, like the dorm I was at with like other people who were at this school, like both other foreign exchange students and other just like Japanese students who were going to Sophia. But it was in a Kogane, this kind of suburb town kind of place, which, okay, so the thing about Tokyo is that, it's generally called a city, but technically it's so big that it has sub-cities.
Yeah, it's like a metropolis, right?
Yeah, it's essentially, it's almost like their equivalent. It's almost like its own state, kind of. Not really, but
it's kind of like New York with the 5 boroughs, right? Is that fair?
Yeah, almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's, they have their own special administrative thing, and so this place I was at was like a part of Tokyo, but it was also kind of its own town. It was kind of, this kind of a suburb place, like I said, and so that was a fun thing though. And so, well, each day was like a half-hour train ride to get to the actual campus. But the thing I liked is that like it was kind of very centrally located in this suburb place where if I took the train like an hour or half hour in one direction, I could get into the heart of the city and all that stuff. But if I took it in the opposite directions, if I went out west, I'd be out in the countryside. I could do all that stuff. So it was like this very convenient central location for exploring like both sides of the Tokyo. And anyway, so I guess long story short is that I never returned this umbrella to the Monkey Bridge people, and I'm still not entirely sure if they actually expected it back or not.
Even to this day?
I'm still. Well, I never went back, so I don't know. But well, anyway, so when I was borrowing it, like there's some ambiguous. Like I wasn't sure if they actually knew that I would never return, and I didn't want it. Like I did kind of need this umbrella because it was a long walk back to the train station.
Herm steals an umbrella.
So this is my dark and sordid past. Anyway,
umbrella thief.
Yeah, so Monkey Bridge is cool, and I climbed Mount Fuji, which was crazy. And
wow.
Like so I went. Like the thing is, it's like Mount Fuji is it's like dangerous half of like weather-wise. It's too dangerous to go in the winter generally. So you're supposed to only climb it in the summer. But when you climb it, it's like, I tell people I climb Mount Fuji and they think it was like this big mountaineering thing or like it's some kind of rock climbing thing. But no, it's like you can kind of just hike up it. Like more, it's strenuous, but it's not like, it's kind of medium to low grade difficulty. It's not like it's not Everest or anything.
It's not like people think it is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's like people always kind of assume it's like a much bigger accomplishment than it was, it was very cool. But like, it was a great place to go. But like, it wasn't like a grueling endurance test by any means. Although, so I ended up going by, like, I was trying to go with a group, which would have been the sensible thing to do, but like the plans fell through, and so there are different other people at the college. They were kind of like they had different schedules. They were leaving the country at different times. Like a lot of these people were the other like study abroad guys.
Yeah,
their colleges had different schedules. So anyway, so I was kind of left on my own. So I'm like, well, I'm going to do this even if I have to do it on my own. So I went and. So I wanted to see the sunrise from the top of Mount Fuji, and the best way to make that work is like you had to, start at night. So I'm going through, I got off the train station and I'm walking there at night, and I guess then somehow I miscalculated essentially. So because I was going on my own, like. I did all the research, but I guess I did it badly, and so I miscalculated the time. Like I started later than I should, and I got off at the wrong spot. Like I got off too far from the place, so from the actual the foot the foot of Mount Fuji. Yeah. So I was walking like a really long time to get there again. I mean to get there in time, and it was going I passed by this. There's this amusement park that was near. It's near Mount Fuji, but so I was just going by it at midnight, which is kind of creepy.
Yeah,
just very dead of it's all closed, dead of night. But then it was also it was July 4th, and while I was there, there was actually fireworks going off somewhere, like this fairly impressive fireworks display, which was seemed odd because why would people in Japan be celebrating the 4th of July? But I guess they do.
I guess they do. They shoot fireworks off, right?
I guess they do at Mount Fuji anyway. So that was weird, but yeah. So that and eventually there was someone. And I was walking along this road through I can't remember the proper name of the forest that surrounds Mount Fuji. Is this spot that's it's this thick forest. It's called the Sea of Trees in Japanese, and it's like this notorious suicide spot as well. So people go there to commit suicide. Jesus. And they're supposed to be and I guess because of that, it's supposed to be haunted, and all this magnets aren't supposed to work there, all this weird stuff. And actually, in Yu Yu Hakusho, Genkai's forest, the area around her house, it kind of has the same thing where it's magnets don't work, and I guess I've never seen it officially stated, but it seems like it's partially inspired by this forest around Mount Fuji. And anyway, so I'm walking through this, not a forest. I'm walking through this not a highway, but this paved, a road for cars, and I'm walking along the side of this to get to Mount Fuji, and I passed, like, it's not really even a place that pedestrians were supposed to go, but because I, just completely botched the logistical arm of this hiking trip, I was kind of just like, I was heading in a straight line for Mount Fuji and just going, through whatever happened to be in the way, including the amusement course. And on each side, it's just like surrounded by huge, just thick forest. It's kind of creepy. Like even though it's like this road, it just felt very desolate. But then I came to this 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 kind of one of those gate, a gate with like security officers, kind of like like kind of toll booth thing.
Yeah. To protect people. I understand that completely.
Yeah. Or not exactly. Like, just to relegate the traffic that's going along this road.
I see. Yeah, it's like a toll booth. Okay, I got you.
Yeah. And so I go and, the policeman at this place is like, they think, well, this is kind of unusual, a guy passing by. And so they kind of, ask me like, oh, what are you doing? And say, oh, I'm, trying to get to Mount Fuji. And they said like, well, okay then. But I asked them like, it's not like these woods aren't actually dangerous in any way. There aren't bears or anything. And they said, probably not. Which not as reassuring as I would have thought. So I'm like, well, it's too late to quit now. So
you made it that far.
They might have just been trying to, screw with me, I guess. But and so I kept going. But eventually, someone actually stopped. Like this car came, and the guy like offered me a ride, and so I accepted which might, looking back on it, like, maybe I was kind of reckless.
You're a lot more reckless than I thought, bro.
Yeah, but at this point, it's like, it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to reach the Mount Fuji in time. Like, might never reach it at this point. I might get eaten by bears out here,
or by that guy. That guy might be a cannibal.
But he turned out, I guess, because at this point I should say, like, people in Japan, like, overall, it's like really. It's a pretty safe country from my limited personal experience and other things that I've heard. It's like they're not typically in danger, at least. Anyways, but this guy, like, for instance, he turned out he was completely nice. He took me to the foot of Mount Fuji, which I guess it turned out like I was kind of shocked at how much farther it was. Like, it didn't look that far, and so I would have never like made it entirely. Like, I wouldn't have made it by sunrise at all if it wasn't for this guy. And I might have been, by the time I got to the mountain, I might have been too tired to even climb it. So this guy really saved my bacon, and don't even know his name, but I owe him a lot. Anyway, so he dropped me off, and so it's still night at this point, and so I go on my own, and so essentially just hike up, and yeah, it's like the whole way along, it's it's a slope, but again, it's not like, you're not scaling sheer cliffs or anything, but it is very cold. And another thing, like I hadn't dressed quite warm enough, and but
so it was cold.
Yeah, it's very cold. Then they have these like periodically there's these little like these cabins there where you can spend money just to kind of get in out of the cold and buy stuff. But I had actually, like, another thing is that another bit of poor planning is I hadn't quite, like, I had just enough money to get back, like, take the train back to my dorm room. Like, so I didn't really have any money to spare, or I didn't have any money really to spare on snacks or supplies, except I got this one chocolate bar along the way. So that was enough to keep me going.
Just one chocolate bar.
Yeah.
Bro, you had some wacky adventures, bro.
Yeah, and so as a result, so I didn't make it. I saw the sunrise from like 3/4 of the way up Mount Fuji or something, but it's still very cool. It was a great experience, and so I got home and I just slept like. Well, I ended up taking a bus back, and I have no memory of that bus ride. Like, I just got on the bus and, I got in my seat, and then my next conscious waking moment was being dropped off back at, my dorm. Well, not my, near my dorm.
Maybe you were abducted by aliens, bro.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? So, man, I could hear you talk about Japanese stories forever, bro, because it's such a wacky country in many ways. Now, you get back to the U.S., right? You've already kind of, I guess you could say you mastered the Japanese language. I've heard Heath's version of the story, but I gotta hear yours. How did you end up hooking up with Kanzentai? That'll kind of be the last kind of chapter of your story here before we, obviously everybody by now knows that Kanzentai and Kanzenshuu fused to become the supreme god, you know, Kanzenshuu. But how did you end up meeting Heath and kind of getting on board with Kanzentai?
Yeah, so, well, this would actually have been before I went to Japan.
Really? I thought it was after.
No, it would have been, well, it was definitely before, but it was either my first or second year at college. Maybe, so it would have been either a year or two before I went to Japan. And so I had started out, like, so at this point, I'd acquired almost all of the Kanzenshuu on my own. Well, you know, basically through my parents and some of my own meager financial resources. And so because I'd started translating like stuff from them at this point I'd moved to the Kanzenshuu EX forums, which I'd actually started visiting around the same time I'd taken that Japanese high school college, you know, the summer class where I'd first started learning Japanese. Just coincidentally around that time I'd started hanging out on Kanzenshuu EX forums. And eventually, like, I just started, you know, I was translating stuff from the Kanzenshuu. I'd started, and, you know, at this point, like, I probably started posting these translations up before my Japanese skills were really quite at the level they should have been. And, you know, which is, you know, I guess I've become a hypocrite because now when I see people who are kind of doing that, you know, I see people do that and they make mistakes. Like, oh no. I have to correct them. But, you know, that's how I started. And, you know, that's how I got better at translating, is just by translating and making a lot of mistakes and then having to have other more experienced people say, like, oh, no, this is how it actually is. And so as part of that process, like, by doing that, I eventually became kind of a consistent, like, you know, known for translating stuff on Kanzenshuu EX forums. And eventually, so one day, I get this email. Oh, and I knew about Kanzentai. So I'd visited a few times. Like, there's a thing I was aware of.
So Kanzentai was just Heath back then, right? Because I remember, actually, Heath told me there was another guy. I remember.
Yeah, there was. A
different guy.
I think it was DBW was his username, and both of them, they were active on Kanzenshuu EX forums as well.
Yeah.
But so one day I get this email from Heath, just saying like, oh, I'd like to offer you this position as the Kanzentai translator, and as a test, here's this translate this thing here, which turned out to be, it was like the postcard for ordering the dragon boxes, or is something like that related to the dragon boxes. Like just this thing where it's like, oh, to check, like sign here to do this kind of official, not even a narrative thing. It's just like one of those, a form to fill out essentially. And so, yeah, so and he's like, oh, if you don't feel, it's very officially, very formally worded, like if you do not feel you are suitable for this position, then blah blah blah, etc. But so it's kind of intimidating actually, because I wasn't like my impression of Kanzentai was that they were these kind of serious, like the very you know, they try to make everything as official as possible.
Authoritative,
yeah,
right?
That's the word I'm
That's
trying to
the word. That has to be a word that Mike came up with, right? Because I don't know Mike too well, but I know he's a big when it comes to marketing. So is that word? Did he come up with that word? Is that like a word that you guys use because of him?
I don't know, but I mean, it seems to fit. Like, yeah, so
authoritative, yeah.
And it was kind of intimidating because at this point, you know, I'd just been kind of screwing around with this translation thing on the forums, just as a, you know, it's just a thing I kind of fell into. And so, but I'm like, well, I might as well. And so I translated the thing and sent it back. He's like, then I get a response like, oh yes, congratulations, you got the job, this non-paying job. And so eventually, like I didn't know at the time, but eventually, like what had happened was that the DBW guy who had been the translator for Kanzentai up until that point, like he had just to move on with his life. And so, yeah, like Heath just needed a new translator at that point. And so, yeah, we just got together. We started emailing. And, yeah, I should say, like, yeah, I was going to college in Nebraska. And Heath is actually he was from Omaha, Nebraska.
Yeah.
So, but while I was at college, he was he was somewhere else. He was at Lincoln, Nebraska. I don't know if he told you, if he mentioned this.
He didn't mention this part of it. He didn't. I don't believe he did.
But anyway, so the weird thing was that even though we lived in very close proximity to each other, even though I was living where Heath grew up essentially, we only got to meet each other once or twice during that period, just because his schedule, he was living somewhere else, and then he moved back to Omaha. But by then I had I think I was just either back in Japan, either I'd gone to Japan or I was somewhere gone on just graduated college. And so, is this thing where it's what at any given time one of us was in Omaha, but never except a few times both of us.
Yeah.
And so essentially we were just corresponding by email, and we had this, he brought me on, and we had this idea okay, let's translate the Kanzenshuu, because that's kind of what I was doing anyway. And so even though I owned Kanzenshuu 1, he sent me scans because it was kind of just easier to translate off the scans than hold the book open and kind of type with one hand, which is a real pain. In the early days, I did a lot of translating, holding a book in one hand and typing with the other hand, which was a real pain in the ass.
Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah, and so that, nowadays I just go off scans, or even if I still don't own a scanner, but now I just take a photo with my smartphone and then go off of that.
Which yeah, that's so unprofessional, but it actually works because those smartphone cameras are amazing.
Yeah.
Right.
And so we put out a translation of all of the text in Kanzenshuu 1, which isn't that much because it's mostly an art book, and then we did Kanzenshuu 2, which was a lot more. And I prepared and it was kind of me going to Japan that kind of cut that project off, I think, because I was busy with other stuff. But I did have I translated a bunch of stuff from the other, and we did all of 4 as well.
Yeah.
And then I had stuff from just the other Kanzenshuu. I did an awful lot of translations from Kanzenshuu 6 that I don't think ever really got formally put up anywhere. And eventually we did do some of the sections from the character dictionary from Kanzenshuu 7. But so we're doing all this stuff on Kanzentai. And then I went to Japan, and one of the things actually was that while I was in Japan was when the Jump Super Anime Tour special came out, which was what we called the Hey, Goku and Friends Return. So the thing that introduced Tarble and Abo and Kado, which was at the time the first animated bit of Dragon Ball in years and years and years.
Years, man. We were all hyped for that one.
And so this was announced before I was in Japan, but it was also announced that the way to get a ticket, it wasn't shown in regular theaters. It was shown just
at a convention, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's called the Super Jump Anime Tour.
Yes.
And yeah, they shown in select locations during select times, and you could only get a ticket by sending a postcard into Jump, so you needed a physical copy of Jump and to mail something to. It's so stuff I didn't really have the resources to do that, but he knew a guy who was in Japan at the time. It was this awkward thing where I was in Japan when it aired, but not in Japan when you would apply to go see it. And so Heath tried to work around that by having a friend he knew who was just already in Japan, but who wasn't really interested in seeing it himself, have this guy send in a postcard and get selected, but it didn't pan out. Because not everyone who sent in a postcard, it's kind of a contest kind of thing, even, I believe.
It's like a sweepstakes.
If I remember right. Yeah, that kind of thing. So this guy, our foreign contact, he sent in a postcard, but he wasn't selected. So I didn't get a ticket, but I made an attempt to sneak into an airing, but it didn't really go anywhere. And so fortunately they put it up online for a little bit there. So that's how I got to see it along with everyone else.
And they put it up subbed, I remember.
Yeah. And so anyway, so I was still just working on Kanzentai for just kind of throughout the rest of college. And then eventually they merged into
Kanzenshuu.
That's what we have today.
Yeah.
But even before, the odd thing was that I remember I went on the Kanzenshuu AX podcast before Heath did, because at that time, Mike invited me on to talk about these translations I did of these outside stories, these text
Are you talking about the Piccolo, Vegeta, and Trunks stories?
Yeah. These things where it's like, they came out in different magazines over time, and each one, it's just like a side story about Piccolo, like Piccolo recounting his life story, Vegeta kind of doing the same, Trunks, it's all them recounting their life stories. It's all in text. Like there's illustrations to go along with it, but it's mostly in the form of text. And so I translated those for the site, and I translated those just kind of on the forums, and another guy who was on the forums, Desiree Campbell, he made a scanslation based on that. Anyway, so I went on the podcast to talk about these with Mike, and at the time, it was like the first contact between Kanzentai and Kanzenshuu AX. And I remember at the time, it was like, even Heath was like, oh, I don't know. Like, he asked me after, it's like, was Mike... He was at, like, Heath almost thought, like, maybe Mike... Like, he didn't know what Mike thought about Kanzentai, essentially.
Did he think that Mike was going to try and recruit you away? Is that what he thought?
No, not really. But he was like, it's like we didn't quite, there's no working relationship between the two sites at that point. And so, but I was the first, but then he got invited on shortly after that. And then Heath, he was on all the time and just became essentially the co-host. And, just eventually, so the two sites, they just worked more and more together until eventually they're like, well, we might as well just make it into one site.
Saves time. Hosting bill. Yeah. Well, I told Mike when I interviewed him that I saw it coming, and Heath. It's just, but everybody did. Everybody it's just easier. It's just a lot easier that way. And you and Julian have definitely helped put together a lot of the translations and the guides on the website. Everybody has their own part to do, of course. And it's such a useful website. I know a lot of people say that, it's a fan site. And it is a fan site. It is made by fans, but it really is kind of its own. It's more than just a site. Like, it's not like you guys are just like Temple of Trunks. Like, I always consider more of a fan site. It's more so like, fanboying or fangirling whatever sex you are over Trunks or whatever character. Whereas Kanzenshuu is more like love of the whole series, but there's guides and actual important information there that you can look up. And I've always found that as to be more than just a traditional fan site. I don't really know what you could even call it.
Yeah, we're trying to be the unofficial official site, I guess you could say.
Yeah, but and the fucked up thing is, and I know this is kind of a big compliment, I do wish that other anime had their own Kanzenshuu. Like, I would love if somebody put together like a Kanzenshuu-esque website for like Sailor Moon, for Yu Yu Hakusho, that had all this information, all these translations. But there's something about Dragon Ball that just connects with people, and that's going to be kind of the last thing I want to talk to you about before we get out of here. We've talked about your whole journey going to Japan, growing up a fan of all these things, Alan Moore. I didn't think we were going to get that in depth, but I love it. So now, my question to you is, what is it about Dragon Ball that you think makes Dragon Ball stand out so much more than other shows? Because I know a lot of anime reviewers on YouTube and other websites, and Dragon Ball is just so much bigger. Like what is it about Dragon Ball that makes it above and beyond anything else in its ilk?
Well, I think I mentioned earlier, but I think like one of the top things is just Toriyama's art style and his character design. It's just always, it's a strong visual element. It's just interesting to look at. Like, it exists, I'm all into the translation stuff, but so much of the appeal of the series is just transcends language. It's all in the visuals and that kind of thing. And so I think that's why it's so popular internationally. And then apart from that, like, I think, it's got the whole action, which is always a popular thing, but I guess you couldn't really say it's like, it's not exactly a deep series, but it's like a wide series. Like, just the fact that you have, like, the scale of time that the story takes place over, where at the start of the series you have Goku as a little kid. At the end of the series, he's a grandfather. You have characters who we see be born and grow up and have their own kids.
It's like the Odyssey. Talk about Greek mythology.
It's not the sort of thing you see in a typical action show. They don't generally go into that kind of, just that huge type of world. Or it's certainly it's more common now. But I think when it came out, and even, or at least, for a lot of, it wasn't like just comparing it even to Batman, the animated series, which it's a great series, but it doesn't do that time thing at all. It's all set. They had Batman Beyond, where it just skips to the future, but it's this whole series of Batman. It's kind of set in this. It's kind of the present. It's just the eternal now. You could say, like, kind of the Simpsons. There's no, like, you could almost say like all of it is in 1 year, which I guess one of the annoying things about Super is that it's kind of got into that mentality. It's kind of it's gotten rid of the time aspect. Even though we're in the current story arc is all about time travel, it's like all of Super is kind of there's no
passage of time. Yeah.
No one seems to age or anything, and it's kind of the Simpsons thing where it's like time passes but nothing changes.
Like Doraemon is like that too.
Yeah.
And actually, I think Sazai-no-chan is as well.
Yeah, because that's like gone on a million years. Like it's 50 years, so if characters aged, they should just be dead by now. But anyway, so I think that aspect, the way the characters, even if like they're not necessarily deep characters on their own, it's like just seeing them grow and change so much is kind of gives them depth in that way. Like beyond, even though Toriyama never sets out to like write a deep character, just seeing them change so much over time gives them that kind of depth. And it's like, I guess, okay, so the series, it's simple on the surface, and well, it's kind of simple all the way down, but it's like there's a lot of it to get into. Like there's a lot of different facets. Like you have all these specialized fans where there'd be like a fan whose thing is all just the background music. And, we've got even multiple scores for the series, and, there's different types of the music to get into. There's the video, like you could be just into the video games. You could be into the different animation styles throughout the series. You could be just exclusively into Toriyama's artwork, or you could be, well, obviously, you could be just into the whole strength debates kind of thing, or go into trying to get into the cultural background and the religious element, like the mythological connections.
Derek Padula's job right there.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or just getting into like the language aspects and translation. So there's nooks and crannies that you can put your fan flag in these different spots. Yeah,
it's so big, and the world building is, I mean, dude, we go from a small little kind of countryside, to the Earth, to space, to time, to other worlds, like other realms, to other universes. It just gets bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
Where else can they go from here? So, tell us about your Patreon before we close out.
Oh, yeah. And so, I mean, even though I'm gainfully employed, and, I guess I'm getting greedy in my old age, so I've started this Patreon.
You say it sarcastically, bro, but some people are going to take that seriously.
Yeah, well, whatever. I mean, as long as I get money, and whatever. And anyway, so I've started this Patreon because I guess I kind of did things backwards, and I started a Patreon to do a book, even though that's kind of the thing you typically do with Kickstarter.
But it's okay. It's all the same thing. But I see your point. Yeah, it is a Kickstarter project, yeah.
Anyway, so long story short, I'm trying to write a book on Dragon Ball Super, just outlining the whole, trying to do like both in-universe and out-universe things, so kind of going over the production history of the series, which is all these weird, crazy elements, and just how it's kind of rushed into production and all that stuff, and then kind of explore, all the continuity stuff, and try and explain that, and all the like mistranslations that we've had because of all the year and a half that we had no official
the Crunchyroll chapter. You're gonna write a Crunchyroll chapter, right?
Yeah, and I mean just the stuff we had before Crunchyroll, and and just the history of the series, even just in the weird way it's been distributed throughout the world, or the way it hasn't been until recently. Anyways, kind of maybe get in my own personal reviews of episodes while I'm at it. So, because I guess my idea is that I kind of want to do something like this for the entire franchise as a whole, but it'd be easier to start with Super just because it's kind of short. It's now got more episodes than GT, but it's still, not far fewer episodes than Z.
Well, for now, I mean, Herms, for all we know, this thing might go on for 200 more episodes.
Yeah, but I mean, my current plan is I'm going to write a book covering the beginning of Super to the end of this future Trunks arc. And then I might do like updates as it goes along.
Volume 2.
Yeah. And so I'm going to get this. It's going to come out sometime in 2017.
And that's patreon.com/Herms98, or is it just Herms?
Just Herms.
Herms. Patreon.com/Herms. So everybody can go on there and drop their 2 cents in. And not literally 2 cents, though. More than that. And get this book out.
Yeah, and it'll be another. And it just. So it'll help me write this book. It also just Just support my general, all those random translations I do just on Kanzentai and on Kanzenshuu and just on Twitter and everywhere.
And Kanzentai back in the day.
Yeah.
Still
Yep.
counts to me, man. Everybody check out Herms on Twitter. Of course, check out Herms on Kanzenshuu. And there's more Herms on the Kanzenshuu message board also. Sometimes you'll post on there certain things that you won't see on Twitter. So it's good to check out, the forums as well. And on Twitter and, like I said, Patreon. And it's been a blast talking to you as always. It always has been a blast. It's always a pleasure. I'm so happy that people are now getting to know more of you and get to know more of your personality. Because, like, I feel like for years, dude, and you still are a big mystery, but for years people didn't really know what to make of it because I feel like you have been kind of, a big, like a mystery guy, essentially. But now people are starting to get to know kind of your humor and your fandom, and it's always refreshing to hear more of the guy, Jake, the real person who had really great Christmas gifts as a kid, dude. Great Christmas gifts, man.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was, thanks for having me on.
Always, man. You truly are an icon, and everybody out there needs to support Herms and remember the importance of this man to our community. Thank you again, Jake, for being on. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We will talk to you guys down that road.